Welcome back. Second part of our lecture today. So we said that in this second part, it would be up to our two groups in the course to make a presentation. Before that, just a short reminder. At 5, Professor Mazzanti will be online for a recap on his lectures, so you are kindly invited to join him. He should have already sent you an invitation, or it will be sent to you shortly. I have prepared an additional work for you for next week. Some of you are already busy for next week because they will have to prepare presentations for Friday. I have added a problem set for every group. So as you had a problem set for this week to prepare in groups, for next week you will again have another problem set to be prepared by each group. You'll find let me see where. Yes, you'll find the problem set in the section problem set in the university website. You see here problem set 2, and it's due by next Wednesday, so April the 8th. It's much shorter and I think easier than the one you had for this week, but still it's some work to do, and the purpose is always the same, is for you to put into practice the concepts that you are studying on the textbook. So it's made of 3 exercises. Again, please, on your answer sheet, list all group members' names so that I can easily recognize who is preparing the answers, and send them back to me as you did this week, as a photo, as a PDF file, or whatever is easier for you. The important is that it is readable. Your answers are readable. So this is a little bit of additional work for next week. And then there will be presentations by those who are not presenting today. And with this, we have finished the homework that you have to do for my part of this course. And yes, one last organizational issue. If there is any of you that is following these lectures, but was already following the course last year, so if there's well, I will put this as a question. Is there any one of you who had already attended the course last year and is attending the course again this year? Any in this situation? Okay, because I just wanted to let all those who had attended the course last year that there is an extra exam session for them programmed by the university. So for those that are late with the exam, there is an extra section. But actually, as I can understand from your answers, from your non-answers, there's no one who is interested in this. So I will contact these students in other ways rather than during the lecture. So let's go back to our lecture, and we said that in this second part of the lecture we will introduce some concepts and ideas about cost-benefit analysis. Cost-benefit analysis is a practical technique used in the policy and process. Actually, it is a practical technique, so there are interesting applications and examples of its use, but there are also theoretical developments concerned with these techniques. So we will see both these aspects, and what I'm asking today is that two groups of students will introduce cost-benefit analysis to all the class, to the whole class. The first group will be briefly detailing the history of cost-benefit analysis and why it is useful. And the second group will be concerned with practical examples in some countries where cost-benefit analysis is actually widely used. So I would ask to the first group, to group one, to make his presentation. To do so, I will stop sharing my screen and ask to the group to share their screen with the rest of the class, and I will also silence my microphone so the group will be able to start presenting to everyone. So if you are ready, I will just stop presenting and stop my microphone. So the floor is you to group one, please. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Okay, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can you see the slide?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Anyway, this morning we posted our slides on the group, so you should have them already. Anyway, let's start with an introduction to the cost benefits analysis and a brief focus on his history. And we start with the concept of externality that we all know from the economic theory. And as you can read, externality is defined as a damage caused by a company's activities for which it does not pay, or something positive created by it for which it does not receive payment. And from the economic theory, we can make an example of a positive externality, like the degree of education and culture generated by an university. And maybe the main example of negative externality is the pollution according to the cause metaphor. Anyway, the notion of externality was already familiar to Sidgwick and Marshall, Sidgwick on the left and Marshall on the right. But the main contribution in this sense was developed by Pigou in 1920, according to his notion of the divergence between private costs and social costs. And in this sense, the evaluation procedure that we do in nowadays is the same for profits as for pollution damage. In particular, we can mention Dupuy's concern with its economic justification for the construction of something, in particular of roads and bridges. And he says that net benefits generated by the construction are measured by the sum of the surpluses of the consumers. Finally, the Pareto principle that we all know from the distribution of goods and from the economic theory does not really exist in real life. And in this regard, we can mention the Caldor the X-Caldor compensation that establishes the idea that net benefits in terms of human welfare gains must exceed the costs in terms of human welfare losses for what we have to sanction. Alessandro, speak to you.
Okay, thank you, Giulio. Of course, the welfare economics proposed by Hicks and Caldor received several critics by the economists of that time. For example, Samuelson argued that the consumer surplus had no practical validity because the marginal utility of income could not be constant. Chitowski showed that there was a potential contradiction in the compensation principle by the fact that it may hypothetically lead to the original situation through the modification of the distribution of income. There were also all-round attacks on welfare economics coming from Jan Little and Jean de Graaf, respectively in critics of welfare economics and theoretical welfare economics. Also, Lipsey and Lancaster showed that a project or a policy may pass the cost-benefit test without necessarily improving overall social welfare. They produced the second-best theory, which affirms that correcting a distortion in one market would not improve social welfare if another distortion exists in another market. Finally, I must mention the issue about interpersonal comparisons, because as Lionel Robbins showed in his most famous essay, the impossibility of interpersonal comparisons of utility doesn't allow to aggregate preferences. In this case, the Arrow theorem can be applied. Arrow, in his Social Choice and Individual Values, argued that if social rankings are based on individual preferences, then there is no way to decide whether something is a social improvement or not. In this context, all non-dictatorial mechanisms for aggregating individual preferences lead to inconsistent social orderings, CBA included. Arrow's theorem defines ordinal fashion, a type of preference that can be ordered through their utility U, without knowing the distance between them, and hence the intensity of the preference. In contrast, if we consider cardinal orderings, then it's possible to attach values to each distance for comparison purposes. If we assume that interpersonal comparisons are possible, and hence the Arrow theorem cannot be applied, so we can use cardinal orderings, then CBA will appear as a valid science, since preferences can be aggregated. Despite this problem, CBA proceeded because those criticisms were applicable also to any competing rule for aggregating preferences, and hence CBA was considered the most appropriate method.
Okay, now I'll talk about historical consideration. We start in 1936, and we see that practical guidelines for welfare economics were drawn up first in the US for water sector. US Flood Control Act declared that the control of flood waters was in the interest of the general welfare, and the role of the federal government was to improve or to participate in the improvement of navigable waters. So we see that the benefit cost rule was used for the first time, but the notion of the cost was restricted to the construction cost and did not embrace wider social losses. At the same time, the notion of benefit was not clearly defined in the Act. In 1950, there were codified the benefit cost rules thanks to Green Books through the Federal Interagency River Basin Committee. So the attention was being devoted to the issues of efficiency in government, and especially in military spending by bodies such as RAND Corporation. In 1958, were written three seminal works, and these books showed that benefit and cost had precise meaning, and they were potentially measurable. The books shows that gains and loss reflect preferences or utility, and in the end, the books shows that cost had always to be interpreted as opportunity cost. In 1960, the basic principle of CBA was defined, and cost and benefit as at the definition, and the benefit cost rules was established. In 1977, the issues of the discount rate about the discount future cost and benefits had long been discussed, but without any real consensus. Nowadays, the choice of the discount rate remain as controversial now as it was 14 years ago, despite measure the base of the subject.
Okay. Now we are going to talk about why use a CBA. And the first important thing to say is that the OECD volume is not a defense of cost-benefit analysis. Rather, its aim is to describe its development and illustrate its application. And in this paragraph are described the reason why some economists tend to favor this method of analysis. The first reason is that it provides a model of rationality, and this is reflected in the fact that CBA forces the decision maker to look at who the beneficiaries and losers are in both the spatial and temporal dimension. And this is not always the case of the world of politics. Also, this rationality model allows decision maker to have a wider view of the issue because all gains and losses of utility or well-being are counted. And also it doesn't only focus on the impact on a single target or a single group or a single group of people. Other important thing to highlight is that the CBA belongs to a group of approaches to policy analysis that do the same thing, such as cost effectiveness analysis and multi-criteria analysis, which impose discipline in terms of goal setting and differentiation of cost from indicators of achievement. The second reason why CBA should be used is that a fundamental prerequisite for achieving the objective is the definition of alternative. And this means that each policy or project must be seen as one of a series of options. And this characteristic is also shared by other methods of analysis like CEA and MCA. Third, CBA should make the decision maker include in the list of alternatives option variation in the scale of a policy or project. And this is a peculiarity of CBA because this point is where net benefits are maximized. And the cost-benefit analysis, unlike CEA and MCA, provides a rule for choosing whether an option can be chosen. In fact, the other method can choose between alternatives to do something, but are unable to address the question of whether it should be chosen. And in conclusion, we can say that it is possible because in cost-benefit analysis, the numerator and denominator are in the same units.
Okay, thank you, Federico. Now I keep explaining why it's important to use CBA to implement economic projects. So the first point said that properly executed CBA should show the costs and benefits accruing to different social groups of beneficiaries and losers. Social concerns about differential impacts can be accounted for by the use of distributional weights. So CBA has the capacity to express costs and benefits either in units of money, reflecting willingness to pay, or in units of utils. So this means the willingness to pay weighted by some index of social importance. So the fifth point, CBA is explicit that the time needs to be accounted for in a rigorous way. This is done through the process of discounting, which is controversial. It is impossible not to discount, and failing to discount means, for example, using a discount rate of 0%, which means that $1 of gain 100 years from now is treated as being of equal value to $1 of gain now. The problem is that what is the correct real number continues to be debated. The sixth point, we have that CBA is explicit that it is individuals' preferences that count. So CBA in this sense is democratic, but some see this as a weakness rather than a strength, since it implies that preferences should count, even if the holders of these preferences may be misinformed. They also argue that there are two kinds of preference, those made out of an individual's self-interest, and those made when the individual expresses a preference as a citizen. Finally, we arrive at the last point, saying that CBA seeks explicit preferences rather than implicit ones. So CBA looks directly for what people want, either in the marketplace or indirectly by seeing how preferences affect a complementary market. All decisions imply preferences and imply money values. For example, if a decision to choose policy X over policy Y is made, and X costs $150 million and Y costs $100 million, then it follows that the benefits of X must exceed the benefits of Y by at least $50 million. The importance of money values was pointed out by Thomas in 1963, and it may be that leaving decision to reveal implicit values is better than seeking those values explicitly, but CBA is clear in favoring the explicit preferences. Thank you for the attention.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. Is there anyone who is listening who has any question? If not, I have one question. When you started describing the first cases of implementation of cost-benefit analysis with regard to water management in the US, I wanted to ask you, with reference to that, it seemed that you were talking about something that started as an empirical practice rather than a theoretical approach then applied. How would you describe the balance between empirical experience and theoretical construction and reflection in the early stages of cost-benefit analysis? Would you see both of them? Would you see one more than another? How was the balance at the beginning, and why was it so? So, just your opinion on this. Any of the group could answer, or you could answer together if you like.
Excuse me, can you repeat the question, please?
Okay. When you started describing the first experiences of cost-benefit analysis with reference to water management in the US, from your description, it seemed that these first experiences were mostly of a practical nature. So it was just doing something in practice, and not a lot of theoretical thinking on this approach. What do you think? Was it more the result of some practice that was done without a lot of theoretical reflection, or do you think there was also theoretical reflections on what was being done? How would you balance the two sides, theoretical and empirical, in the practice, in the first practices of cost-benefit analysis? Is it clearer?
Yeah, I can try to answer.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. I don't know. In my opinion, as I said, for my part, the historical part at the beginning, maybe like it happened in France, practical experience try to answer to theoretical experiences. So maybe at the beginning it was something uncertain. So I don't know, in my opinion.
So you are saying that, in your opinion, it was more a practical tool with less theoretical thoughts behind it.
Yeah,
so
in fact,
okay.
In fact, we have to measure the net benefits in terms of consumption by the consumer, I think.
Okay. Anyone wants to add something on this from the group? Do you all agree with your colleague? Okay. If it's all very good. Thank you very much for this presentation.
Thank you.
Very good work. My congratulations. And now I would ask to the second group to make his presentation. Thank you again, and let's listen to the second group.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Angelo of the team 2. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, very
Okay.
well.
So if you want, I can start the presentation. One moment. Okay, are you seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So, hi everyone again. I am Angelo Camilleri, and me with some of our colleagues are going to introduce our project, which tells about environmental CBA for OECD countries. In the specific, we will analyze specifically what are the characteristics of the environmental cost benefits analysis for 4 of the OECD countries, which are USA, Canada, United Kingdom, and European Union. So before we start analyzing the proper nations, we will start about talking about CBA in general. So as CBA tend to be used as an analytic tool for project evaluation, it can be called project appraisal. But the most interesting fact about project appraisal is the fact that CBA can be used only in countries where the regulatory impact analysis process is used. This is called also RIA, and it's a process which is used mostly by agencies in order to value some project of for social benefit. So due to this, OECD states that CBA is actually the most desirable typology of RIA, and this is made because CBA is one of the tools which allow us to introduce a lot of different variables. But this is also one of the main issues of the CBA, because through CBA, we can also analyze variables which are potential, like potential benefit and potential costs. But due to this, it's often difficult to give a monetary value to this. So the first case that we will analyze is United States of America, which is one of the most interesting cases, as is the country where CBA is mostly used. It was firstly regulated in an Executive Order 1229-1 of 1981, which states a principle which is potential benefit outweighed costs. Through this statement, basically, there is a new concept which arises that states that basically any potential benefit of a project is add more value than actual cost of it. So if some project tend to have the potential benefits, not the actual benefits, but simply the potential benefit higher than the cost, it can be accepted. So due to this, the cost benefit mindset starts to spread, and it started to being used despite some limitations that were applied, for example, by the fact that CBA should be required by the statute. So due to this, also the US Environmental Protection Agency started to use CBA as tool to value some project, and due to this is the first step to the environmental CBA as we know it today. So, by the way, despite this, US legislator considers CBA not relevant in some cases. This happened because in mostly of the projects which have public benefit, it happened that the potential benefit tend to be to have less credit despite the potential costs. And due to this, the authorities usually sometimes tend to ignore completely the cost aspect of a project in order to make this project pass. So in 1993, there was a new executive order, which is the 12866. It introduced a new principle, which is benefits justify costs. Through these benefits, we have no more the limitation of to have necessarily potential benefit with that must be higher than costs, than actual costs. And for this, it happens clear that a lot of project now can be passed only because their net benefits were considered of interest. So due to this, the CBA became an actual accounting framework more than an analysis tool. But despite this, the issue that we stated at the beginning, which was the difficulties in the monetary value attribution to potential benefit and cost, stayed. Because Hen states that benefits for ECBA were valued in only 83% of cases. But among these 83%, only its 23% had actually the corresponded monetary costs. So it's a clear proof of what we said in the introduction, basically. So now it's turn of Samantha Piro.
Hi. Always about the USA. Oh, sorry. Okay. In some cases, CBA approach has been explicitly rejected by USA court rulings. Neglect that has been often justified through the notion of public trust, which means that in the context of damage liability, an agent who damaged the environment is held liable for those damage. Under public trust, national natural resources are held in trust for all citizens now and in the future. Public trust gives to the state the right and the duty to protect the environment on behalf of persons under legal disability, independently of ownership of the resource. Further, public trust works with restoration of the environmental asset itself, where the compensation takes the form of in-kind services, as Coppen-Smith said in 1993. Then, outside of the liability context, it has been argued that public trust doctrine has influenced the courts in a ruling that USA Environmental Protection Agency is authorized to regulate without reference to cost and benefits. In the USA, there is a debate about when CBA should be used for environmental regulation and how far practice follows the OMB guidance. However, the USA Environmental Protection Agency has extensive guidelines which are intended to comply with the OMB requirements, covering most of the issues related to CBA analysis. Anyway, the practice of CBA requires a considerable practical experience as well as theoretical understanding, and for this reason, a comprehensive guidance doesn't exist. In fact, USA EPA guideline is more a checklist with just few pages about evaluation techniques, but remains the most elaborate set of guidelines in any OECD countries.
Okay, now we will talk about Canada. And so in 1995, the Canadian government published the general guidelines for CBA. This guideline was prepared by external consultants. And for this reason, it is non-technical and is not aimed at professional economists. Also, for this reason, it is far less comprehensive than the US Environmental Protection Agency guidelines and provides only a beginning to make a CBA. Despite that, it is effective in introducing the reader to cost-benefit thinking. Now we will talk about the UK. And so in UK, the regulatory impact analysis procedures are used when the regulation has significant impacts on business or the voluntary sector. In 1998, RIA was made mandatory for regulations. So each government department has a regulatory impact unit that is also called the RIU, and we have also a centralized RIU in the Cabinet Office. The most recent guidance is given in a UK Cabinet Office, and it tells practitioners how to conduct an RIA. Each RIA must consider costs and benefits and their distribution, but the guidance doesn't indicate how to value costs and benefits in monetary terms. But this problem is overcome with the Green Book of the UK Treasury.
So the way that the European Union deals with environmental CBA and project appraisal techniques is summed up in the Article 130T of the Treaty on the European Union, which states that in preparing its policy on the environment, the community shall take account of available scientific and technical data, environmental conditions in the various regions of the community, potential benefits and costs of action or lack of action, and the economic and social development of the community as a whole and the balanced development of its regions. So by reading this norm, we can understand that there is no strict requirement or a strict indication to that a certain directive or a project has to, let's say, pass through a CBA test or be compliant with any other project appraisal technique. In 2003, general appraisal procedures started to be employed by the European authorities, but the way that they are used is just in the first stages of the elaboration of the new directive, since its main goal is to just narrow down the possible choices of option as to individuate just the ones that are going to be the more effective and the one that are going to be providing more benefits over costs. And in a second passage of this stage, they have in fact to be subjected to the external impact assessment, which is another and distinct procedures. However, again, we can state that even though they seems like procedures similar to the CBA, there is no strict indication that they have actually to be a cost-benefit analysis or any other kind of formal methodology. Pearce, in two works, the first one in 1998 and the second one in 2004, studied how the European authorities dealt with the cost-benefit analysis in a specific way, and he found out that after up to 1990, very few procedures were conducted. After 1990, especially in the field of air and water pollution, the EU Commission started to carry out in-house these procedures, or either to commission it to other institutions. In the 2004, again, Pearce states that CBA is actually carried out most of the times, but that it's not the only test, it's not the only tool that European authorities have to better understand if a directive should pass or not. Because the main complication regarding the European Union is that being more states with its own decision, and since each state has its own evaluation of environmental costs and benefits, and so values cost and benefits in different ways, the European decision, on the other hand, apply the same values for anyone. So if they manage to obtain a major degree of efficiency on the one hand, on the other hand, there is a problem regarding the fact that sometimes these evaluations do not resemble reality, do not reflect reality for any country. So the final conclusion can be that even though the cost-benefit analysis and project appraisal techniques are widely used in the European context, they're not the only tool that helps them in making the final decision about the directive. So in order to understand whether a directive should be implemented or not. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your presentation. Thank you very much. Again, if there is any of your colleagues who has any questions on the presentation or anything that wants to ask to have more details, you are really free and welcome to make your questions. Any doubt or any curiosity? Okay. So if there are no questions, I have one question, especially concerning your analysis of the experiences in the US, Canada, and the UK. It seems that in all these three countries, there are kind of guidelines, well, more or less structured guidelines and the detailed guidelines for cost-benefit analysis. In your opinion, based on what you have read on these three countries, which of them would you say is the one that has developed a more complete and detailed set of guidelines for cost-benefit analysis? That is there one of the three countries that for you is more effective in providing a common framework for implementing cost-benefit analysis in public projects and programs? Do you have any idea on this, or what is your opinion on this?
Well, honestly, I think that USA is maybe the country that deals with it in the prettiest way, we could say, because despite the fact that we still have the problem of about the cost attribution to something which is not actually available, like actual cost or benefits. But despite this, I think it's the most complete guideline among the others.
Okay, and when this is for the three countries, US, Canada, and UK, but then you also you were also talking about the experience in the EU, and that's quite interesting because on the one side, when you were talking about the EU treaty, you said that there is a specific reference to this kind of approach, but then that there is no common framework. How would you judge the treaty, well, the effectiveness of what is contained in the treaty when you say that in practice there's no common framework on this? What's your opinion?
Well, it's just, I think it's more general way to see the European policy, because as a general, let's say, attempt to set common frameworks, set common rules, but on the other hand, also leaving a huge margin of freedom to the various states. As I've said before, in fact, that each state may have its different evaluations of what is an environmental benefit or cost. So I think it's also supposed to be this way. It should not be that it should not have so much constraint as to evaluate different situations in the same way. It can be a problem in this sense.
Yes, I understand very well your point of view, but then I'm wondering, what about European policies and projects? So policies and projects that are actually implemented by the European institutions or financed by them, then I mean, we have less the problem of allowing each member state to keep its own procedures, but we have a problem of having a European approach for what is done under the European umbrella, I would say, or not? Don't you think so?
Yeah, at a certain point, it's also supposed to be the EU that undertakes the most, let's say, harsh actions towards the environmental issues. So maybe they should try to apply it in a more strict sense. But on the other hand, it's still fundamental that each state has its own flexibility margin to better implement any kind of policy.
Okay, I understand your point. That's fine. Okay, thank you very much. No other questions? You said that you have already shared your presentations. If it's fine for you, I will also post them on the course website, where I have all group works. I will post also your presentation, so for your colleagues, when they are preparing for the exams, they may access it, and I think they may be useful for them. And because this is part of the course program, of course, so you have studied this more in detail or earlier than your colleagues, because you had to make a presentation on this, but this is something that everybody in the course should know very well. So if it's fine for you, I will post them on the course website. And having said this, I think also the lecture of today is over. We have done everything we had to do. I'm very glad with your presentations. They were very well done. So hopefully they were useful for your colleagues. And if there's nothing you would like to say or to ask, I would, let me see, somebody is writing now. Okay, no questions? Then, okay, the lecture is over now. At 5 o'clock, there will be Professor Mazzanti. And so have a nice weekend. Thanks for being with me today, and see you next Thursday. Enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye to everybody.